Yeah.
Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Byron Pace. It is the 17th of September 2020, and oh, what a show I have for you today. It's quite a long one. We ended up speaking for forever, and we could have carried on talking for twice as long as this podcast was recorded. In fact, I think we almost did after we stopped recording. I speak to the Urban Huntsman. It's Urban Huntsman on Instagram, which is my friend, an amazingly talented photographer, Danny Christensen. We go from his early life in a hobby farm in Denmark to being a high-end fashion photographer in New York, back to the foothills of Italy, hunting public lands in the state of New York, to fishing the coastline, to connecting with nature and food, and his desire to communicate this connection with nature to the world. It's an incredible conversation. So I'm going to make my intro as quick as possible so that you can dive into this. Of course, I have to thank the Patreon supporters, which this week at the top tier include Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of rdcontracting.co.uk, Tom McCraith, James Benjamin Normandale, James Marchington, the guys at South Ayrshire Stalking, Josh Starling, Thomas Cameron, and Mark Zabrowski. If you would like to support the podcast, and it is massively appreciated, whether you're a top tier and get your name shouted out, or you are donating $1 a month, which isn't even a cup of coffee, it makes a massive difference and really, really helps me bring these shows to everybody. You can do that by heading over to patreon.com/Byron Pace. And if you want to follow me on any of the socials, I should now be just at Byron J. Pace everywhere. If you search Byron J. Pace on any of the social platforms, you should find me. And of course, if you want to have a look at the website, it is thepacebrothers.com, and you can check out the shop there. You can order Modern Huntsman through there. You can see some of the films that we've been involved in over the years. And of course, all the podcasts are there and extra show notes. We had a competition 2 weeks ago to win a copy of Modern Huntsman, and I made it for the very first time a Twitter competition. And I was asking for you to comment and share something about the podcast on Twitter, and quite a lot of you did, even though we don't have all that many Twitter followers, either on the podcast channel or my own personal channel, which is the main one that I use, which is at Byron J. Pace. But I picked a person at random who said, this podcast is the one that got me into podcasts. Highly recommended. Thank you very much, Paper Case, which is at Yorks_paper. I think that's the at Yorks_paper case. So I'm not entirely sure what your name is, but you live in Nottingham. So contact the show and I will send you a copy of Modern Huntsman. And of course, we're going to be running another competition to win a copy. We are currently working on the next volume right now, which is blowing my mind. We are that far through the years. We're working on volume 6 as I'm recording this. And volume 5 is sadly out of stock, but we will be doing a reprint. But we have volumes 1 to 4 sitting in the shops waiting to go. And if you would like to win a copy of volume 3, that's what we're giving away on this show. I'm going to make it very specific. So I apologize if you're not an Instagram user, and I apologize if you're not an Instagram user who uses stories, but we have a competition on every show, so I have to think up variety for these. So all I'm going to ask you to do is share this podcast in your Instagram story. So I'll always post about the show in my Instagram stories, probably a couple of times over the 2 weeks between the long form shows. So you can either share that or put in your story where you're listening or something. Just put it in your stories. Make sure you tag me so that I can see it. I'm at Byron J. Pace, and I will pick a winner at random from those people who have posted in their stories. Of course, if you want to read more about Modern Huntsman, head over to www.modernhuntsman.com. And actually, you can go and check out my most recent monthly column. Well, I've just started it, so I only have one article up there. But if you have a look at the monthly columns on there, I have an article where I talk about earthworms in the Arctic and peatlands and carbon sequestering and peatlands in Scotland. So very environmentally focused, and I'm really looking forward to building that out, over the next year and contributing environmental conservation-based science to the Modern Huntsman website. So with all of that said, let's get into the show. Danny, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. I can't believe that it has taken this long for us to sit down and record together, because we've known of one another for quite some time. I think I was following you on Instagram before you were published in Modern Huntsman, but we had the chance to actually meet up in person. It was like the weird modern world is that you feel like you have relationships with people even if you've never met them before. And we had a chance to meet up in person last year because you were doing some work in Scotland.
I was, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, of course. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a while. We've been trying to make this happen for quite some time now. I was in Scotland last year, and I knew that you were somewhere in the neighborhood. So I figured let me just see if you're actually relatively close, and you were 15 minutes away from where I was.
Yeah,
so.
I know. I remember now. You're like, Scotland's not a big place. I'm going to be in the country. Do you live anywhere? It was near Glenclover.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can almost see up Glenclover from where my house is. So.
Yeah. You're like, oh well, you're up the road, so. Maybe a beer is in place.
Yes, and a beer we did, and it was good. It was too brief, but it was good.
Yeah.
Tell me, just before we get into, we're going to dive into a whole heap of things. I'm currently speaking to you in Italy. Now, Italy, if I reverse time to March, Italy was the country that everyone was looking at because that's where COVID-19 was blowing up. How are things with you right now? Are you okay? How far were you from the sort of epicenter of it in Italy?
First of all, I'm okay. My near circle of friends here are all okay. There's a couple of people that contracted the virus and went through a pretty hard time, but nobody is seriously ill, and everybody has recovered. Those two people have recovered. I am about 30 minutes drive, maybe 25 minutes drive from one of the epicenters. Basically, where it started was no more than 45 minutes drive from where I am. So I'm in the northern part of Italy, about an hour and 20 minutes south of Milan. Lodi is the name of the area where the first, they trace it back to the first contaminated person that entered in. I think he was coming home from a business trip in China. And so I was pretty much in the middle of it, but then again, I wasn't, because I'm on the countryside. I live in a small village, or just outside a small village, and there's about 25, 30 minutes into the metropolis city, but it's a world apart. And basically, my wife and I and my dog anchored down here on this little Italian farm that I bought, and we basically stayed here and lived more or less self-sustained for about 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. But
it's a good time to be in the countryside right now, for sure.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. I mean, we can see how many people are venturing out here now. I think after I've been locked down in the city for so long, everybody's is looking for an escape now and for the future. And I think a lot of people reevaluated how they lived their life and what was important, and locked into a 900 square foot box in 3 months. I think you get to understand that there's a natural connection that's seriously missing, and it's starting to drive you mental, and, and you want to get the hell out of there, and you want to prepare for the future, whatever that might hold. So hopefully not another round of this, but let's see.
I hope not, but it's not looking promising right now.
No, it's not. In the region where I am right now, it's good. There's very little contamination, new contaminations. The daily numbers are many times in my region has been zero, and it's been that for a while. I think there's only a handful of people in the ICU at this time, so So I feel a hell of a lot more safe traveling around here than I would do in most other places in Europe.
And are
So
you starting to work again,
I'm
like out
starting
and
to
about?
work.
Because
Yeah,
your day job is as a photographer.
is a photographer primarily. Yeah, director, photographer, and I write quite a bit too, which I luckily can do from my hammock or from my house at least. So
Absolutely. Now, I want to dig into your history a little bit because when I came to know you, I knew you initially through your Instagram, which is Urban Outdoorsman. Oh, have I got that right?
the Urban Huntsman.
Urban Huntsman. I was
Urban
close.
Huntsman,
Urban
yeah,
Huntsman,
close enough.
and which is a showcase of the stuff that you do out and about in the great outdoors, and your photography and some of your stories. And then your contributions through Modern Huntsman. So I got to know a little bit about your hunting and fishing and making use of resources off the land. But I also know that you have a background in photography and high-end fashion. So, but we know in the brief time that we've had to have a conversation over a beer, I never really had a chance to dig into this. So, tell me about your backstory. How did you get to where you are right now in the foothills of Italy? What was a young what was the young version of you like?
Well, first of all, I think a valid question back at you would be how long time do we have to discuss this?
Well,
Because
my
of the
diary's
journey.
clear.
But anyway,
My diary is clear now.
I'll try to
I
do the
want to know about the
abbreviated
young
version.
Danny.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Denmark. I grew up on a farm.
Oh, so you're a Viking.
I'm a fucking Viking, yeah. Yeah, pardon the language.
I know some of your fellow countrymen, and all the Danes that I know are tremendous people.
Thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. That's you haven't met all of them, I can tell you that. There's some that not, but but yeah, we did tend to be quite friendly and quite engaging. So, um, well, anyway, I'm back to it. I grew up on a small, like, what we in Denmark call like a hobby farm, which basically means we didn't live off of the farm. My parents wanted my sister and I to grow up with some sort of connection to the land, connection to our food sources, have that experience, understand the circle of life. And of course, they was also for selfish reasons for the two of them. They both love nature, and so they bought this little farm when I was 5. I moved from the house we lived in into this farm in Denmark, which was in a small outskirts of a small village, very much similar to kind of the situation where I'm living right now. So that was my upbringing when I believe I was 14. So in the 80s, we moved from the farm. And that basically, well, I must have been older. I must have been 15, 16. Um, and that move was not a happy one for me. I was very much in um, it was very much a source of everything for me. That being a source of time spent alone in nature. We were pretty close. We had a piece of forest where I would spend a lot of time. There was a creek running through there. I spent many days down there fishing by myself. We had enough land for me to hunt. So
Sounds like heaven.
hunting. It was heaven. It was heaven.
Yeah, it
Um,
sounds very, very similar to how I grew up for most of my years. Although we never
yeah,
actually had. Well, actually, when I was very young, like 5 or 6, we did have like 14, 15 acres. So it could
yeah,
have been,
yeah,
in inverted commas, kind of a hobby farm, although we never treated it as that.
yeah.
But from most of my life up until going to university, all those things that you described is exactly what I had access to because we had a house in the middle of nowhere and we knew the
That's great.
farmers. So
Yeah, perfect.
I'd fish in the river and build
Yeah,
dams in the stream and hunt
exactly. That
rabbits
was
out the back
me.
door.
That was
So
me too.
I can picture this vividly.
That was me too. So you know kind of what that does to a person, and I think
Oh yes,
I many people have asked me where did the hunting start from, and it started from being in nature. There was I never had like a role model, and never hunting wise. I never had anybody that took me by the hand and took me into nature. It was something that I came to by myself, and for the lack of other people around, I started seeking it out myself. And my dad had a really good friend who was a hunter, but he stopped hunting for a long time because he had an incident that was emotionally very challenging for him. With a hare that got shot on a hunt, and I don't know if you ever heard it. I've unfortunately heard it before, but if a hare is not dead, it can sound pretty dramatic.
yeah, yeah. It's pretty
And
harrowing.
yeah, it sounds very much like a baby crying, actually.
It
So
does. Yeah.
it's not a very pleasant experience, and that deeply affected him, and he stopped hunting. So, although he told me a lot of stories, a lot of hunting stories that, of course, inspired me, he was not one to take me out hunting. So the wonderful parents that I have, my mom decided when I was coming of age and I could actually take the hunting license, which means in Denmark you can start hunting when you're 16 and you can start taking the license when you're 15. So with nobody else around, my mom decided to take the hunting license with me, to kind of be sure that she knew how much it would mean to me, but she also knew that there was a good chance, I guess, based on my school history, there was a very good chance that half of the time I have the lessons, I will probably be out fishing or doing something else instead of being at the classes. So yes, she was quite aware that it was a good idea to support me in this one on many levels. So um, I started hunting and hunted for a long time in Denmark. Typical day to day small hunts in groups with some friend. I had a cousin that had a boyfriend that basically became my mentor over anybody else, and he would take me out hunting and fishing. And he had this red little sports car that his that is 2 meters could barely squeeze into, and it looked completely fucking ridiculous. But anyway, it was the vehicle. How we managed to get the fishing
That's
rods
the
and the
hunting
guns into
vehicle.
that little sports car. It was like a Fiat sports car. I don't remember what it's called, but anyway, it was way too small for the kind of trips that we were doing. So that was basically my introduction to hunting, and that's how my many years in Denmark went. But back to the farm, when we moved from the farm, it dramatically uprooted my reality. It uprooted my identity in many ways because I would very much spend the time out in nature the majority of the time when I weren't in school, and a lot of the time when I ought to be in school, I would still be out in nature. I would look out the window and daydream myself out to the creeks and to the rivers or to the down to the lake where I would be fishing instead of listening to this very annoying German teacher that I had. So um,
It's easy to be distracted by these things when you should be learning. It's only later in life as you get a little bit older that sometimes you wish you'd paid a little bit more attention in
yes,
school and
yeah,
university
yes,
and learned a little bit
yeah,
more. But, I think there is definitely something to be said for the school of the great outdoors. And a lot of people miss that in their, as they're growing up now, because we do live in urban centers
yeah. We do.
increasingly.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Um, I think it obviously it formed me in many ways to grow up on that farm. It formed me to have the close connection to life and death. We had cows, we had goats, we had chickens, we had ducks and geese and pigeons, and occasionally we caught a chicken and the head went rolling, and we cleaned it, and then we ate it. So we from a very early age, I have pictures when I'm sitting 5 years old and have my arm into a chicken and in the middle of pouring out the innards of the chicken and cleaning it for dinner later on. So I think when you're talking about, as you mentioned before, about urbanization and people gravitating towards the cities, we lose that. We lose the understanding of it. We lose the understanding of life and death, and we lose the connection to nature. And when we do that, we also we lose the respect for it. We are no longer advocates for conservation. We're not advocates for the environment, animal welfare. So it's I think that was the kind of the springboard to the development that I went through, and that brought me where I am today. But before I got here, I went to business school in Copenhagen and worked in advertising agencies here in Denmark for a couple of years, and then I got accepted into Miami Advertising School, and
Wow, that's quite a departure from
yeah,
Denmark.
that's quite a departure. In between, I had a couple of years outside of the country. I went to first I went to France and lived up in like a ski resort, and I've been doing a lot of different martial arts for years. And by the time I got there, I think I was 19. Yeah, I think I was 19 and 20, and those. I think you've been to some of those ski resorts probably in Europe, I could imagine, but
I haven't. Do you know what?
no.
I've been by a couple of ski resorts in Norway when I was filming and hunting there, but
Uh-huh.
I can't ski or snowboard. It's
Oh,
not something
shit.
I've ever done, so I've never had a reason to go to. And I need to rectify this because it looks so much fun. I mean, I don't know whether I'd really be into downhill skiing, but so many of my European friends cross country ski because they're doing it for some other part. Like normally the guys that I know are using it because they're hunting capercaillie in the snow,
Right.
and that I could see that incentive. Like that would be the thing that
Mhm.
would drive me. And I got a very good friend in Norway, Lisa, and she's always out skiing, cross country skiing during the winter months. So I mean, this is a side note to these ski resorts, but
Yeah.
I need to learn. So it's on my bucket list.
Yeah. No, it's tremendous. I mean, I don't know. To be honest with you, I haven't done it much for 5 to 6 years, but I miss it a lot. I miss going crazy once in a while. I miss getting a serious adrenaline rush. I don't know. It's been depleted from my life recently, so I feel a
I
little bit locked
imagine, and
out.
I might be totally wrong with this, but from the little that I do know you, I imagine that the young Danny was quite a wild character. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that would probably be fair. Yeah, that would probably be fair.
I'm imagining 20-year-old you, and I know what you look like now because you're probably about 10 or 15 years older than I would have pegged your age. And I imagine a 20-year-old Danny probably had a lot of fun in the ski resorts in France.
Yes, a lot of fun. Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting environment when you get dumped in there, and you kind of have to make your way. And I found a job the area is called Val Thorens in France, which is part of a very major ski resort that has three valleys, and it's kind of the place to be for young people at that time at least. And I did not. I came there to snowboard. I really wanted to snowboard more than anything else. Um, so my objective was to find a job at night so I could snowboard during the day. And I bumped into this British dude that was a former special force guy, and Terry. Um, and he was in charge of security at this prestigious nightclub there, and yeah, that led to me being a bouncer at this nightclub for 2 seasons, and I was snowboard during the day and
Just
hit the
living the
gym,
dream.
and then have something to eat, go to work, and repeat the day after.
So what was it that pulled you out of this cycle of snowboarding and working in nightclubs and just generally having fun?
Well, I think it was just
You grew out of it.
the ski resort is a seasonal thing, and so after the first season, I went to Crete in Greece, and the year before I was there on vacation and started diving, took a diving course, and I really wanted to continue the diving. I thought it was I found a tremendous excitement and peace underneath the water where you don't hear anything else. Everything else disappears, kind of like what it does sometimes with some of the intense hunts that you can be out on, or intense in the sense of just solitude and silence.
Diving's incredible.
Yeah,
It's
diving.
like
I mean, you just
I compare it to, not that I know apart from the fact I've been in planes and helicopters, but
Mhm.
I think it's the closest that we can be to sort of independently flying, because I always think of it as
Yeah,
flying
yeah,
underwater.
yeah. It was. I ended up working, advancing in the educational system under Patty, and became a dive master. And at the end of the second season there, I felt a hell of a lot more comfortable underwater than I did above. So it was really an interesting kind of reflection now that I look back on it, and the time after that came after. So a tremendous experience, and that's where I started spear fishing. Also, which I've been a part of some of my adventures since. But the time in Greece propelled me back to Denmark, and I worked there for a while, and so that was it. In between. A trip to Miami and worked there for about a year and a half. So
What
I've
was
been
that
back and
like?
forth a little bit.
What was Miami like for you?
Well, I was there. I was there twice. The first time in '98 and '99, which is quite a few years back, and that was a very good time in Miami. It was a lot of fun for me. I worked a daytime job that paid pretty well. I started. I continued the kickboxing in South Florida, kickboxing in on Miami Beach. So it was a good life back then for those couple of years. I enjoyed it at that time. But when I
But a
returned,
long way from the great outdoors, though.
a long way from the great outdoors, and then again, it wasn't. Um, Luckily, I started getting immersed into the fashion industry at that time, and luckily I met a photographer who is a Miami native, but he's also an avid outdoorsman. So you drive 30 minutes from South Beach and you're in the Everglades. So we would take trips into the Everglades, hunting and fishing, and luckily his dad had a very nice deep sea fishing boat. So we would go out deep sea fishing, and we would go out on a smaller boat and go out to the sandbars and go swimming around, spear fishing, go diving for lobster. So I still had it. I had the nature. I had the nature experiences there enough for me to feel that it was suffice for that period of time at least. So
So high-end fashion photographer by day, and by night and weekends, you were away, sort of replicating the life you had lived back in Europe.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
I weren't a photographer back then.
Oh, so you hadn't actually started photography then?
No, I actually hadn't started
Ah.
photography then. When I returned to Miami for the second time was in 2000 when I went to Miami Advertising School to take a master program, what they call a boot camp, which is especially a very short period of time, and entire education cramped into 6 months. So I went to school every single day, but I also took a job as a bouncer again at a nightclub just to have some extra cash and get to mingle a little bit and get introduced to some of the attributes that Miami can offer. So 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 those 6 months went by, and with school every day, and as soon as I was done, I couldn't wait to get the hell out of Miami, because the scene had changed a lot. Back to your question, the scene from 2000, from 98 and 99 to 2000, 2001, when I finished there, had changed dramatically. A lot of my old friends started moving out. There was a lot of crime that moved into South Beach at the time, and it was all due to the change, or not all, but primarily due to the change of music at the time. That was right around the time when the house and electronic music was going out and was being replaced by hip hop. So we had, on South Beach, unfortunately, they brought some of the negative sides to the hip hop culture into Miami Beach, and you don't have to move far out from Miami Beach before there's some areas you don't want to go into. And many of those people started moving into Miami Beach during certain nights when the clubs were playing hip hop, and the larger artists were starting to give concerts there. So the whole scene changed, the mood changed, the energy of the beach changed a lot. So when I was done with advertising school in 2001, I was ready to get out. So packed the car and drove up to New York. And
Okay.
that's when life really started,
I was going
I
to say,
think.
but New York's an even greater departure because I mean, I've actually never been. I've had plenty of friends who have been. I have a very good friend who spent a bit of time there, and even for her, who's lived in cities her whole life, she's like, New York was just, it was just too much. It just felt claustrophobic and kind of dirty all the time, and everyone was like busy and hustling, and I'm only conveying what I've been told because I can't make any comment myself. Although I imagine from what I've seen of it that because of the kind of person I am and where I live, which is in the middle of nowhere, it's not a place I'd want to spend a huge amount of time. So I mean, a draw to New York just does not seem like a move from a man who was clearly ingrained in the countryside and outdoors pursuits.
At, at, uh, at the time, that was not really a consideration for me. I think it was when you finish advertising school, you'll have, if you want to stay in the U.S., you'll have certain markets that you can go to that is most likely going to propel you in your career, and where you're going to learn the most and get the best jobs. Basically, it's New York, number one. San Francisco is a major creative hub. Today, LA is very high on that scale. Also, Chicago has had a lot of advertising at that time. So those were the primary markets that you would go to, and for me, it was New York. There was no doubt that it was going to be New York. Actually, I very much consider San Francisco also, but since my family was at that time and still is based in Denmark, for me to move all the way over to the West Coast would mean that I would move even further away from the family and
Yeah, another 5 hours if you want to get home.
yeah, and the outlook to being further away, and those roadblocks for spending quality time with them would most likely mean that I wouldn't see them as often, and New York just seems like the right solution to me. I've been up to New York a few times before, and of course was very intrigued with the city. And going back to what you said before, that the city is incredible. I lived both in the city, and I spent the majority of those 17, 18 years in New York. I spent them in Brooklyn.
Wow,
Um,
you were there for 17, 18 years?
yeah, it was.
Wow, I had no idea it was so long. So if I want to
Yeah, it
go and
was.
experience New York, I need to go with you.
Yeah, depending on what you want to experience, I can I can guide you pretty well. If you want to go outdoors, I know exactly where to go. If well, maybe we shouldn't dive. further into this. This is a discussion off air.
So, I mean, you obviously eventually felt. I mean, you were there a long time. You obviously felt comfortable there.
Yeah, I felt very comfortable. I was very lucky when I got to New York. I didn't have a job right out of school, so I of course had to make a living somehow. And there's I don't know if you have it in the UK, but there's a guide in the US. This was before the internet really took over, but there was a guide in the US called the SAGAF Guide, and it basically you can get them from the different cities, and it lists all the best places to go, the best restaurants, best lounges, and so forth. So I grabbed that. Yeah, I bought that guide, and I went down the list and said, okay, I need to work in a place to make some money to start out with, but I also want to get connected to New York City. So I looked at the guide, and I went and interviewed with number one at the time called Asia de Cuba, and that was a restaurant, Asian restaurant lounge, wildly popular. But I didn't like the atmosphere. I didn't like the vibe. Didn't like the people much that I interacted with during that interview. So I went down the list, and number three sounded really intriguing. There was a restaurant on the Lower East Side, Shea Asada. It was kind of like a hidden gem. And kind of a bit of a celebrity hangout spot with the basement where people could kind of hide out, and there was performances going on. There was cabaret, and so it sounded like the right place for me. It sounded interesting, fun. It sounded multifaceted, not just just a posh place where people come in to be seen and drink their brains out or whatever they did. And so I ended up interviewing at this restaurant and got a job as a doorman there, and that was my introduction into photography because the owner was a prominent fashion photographer. So I started helping him and assisting him for some time for the different jobs, and that's kind of how it developed into photography rather than advertising.
Wow. So that was your route into picking up a camera, and now uh, photography is what I originally knew you for.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
incredible. So how many years were you doing photography in New York? Was that all of your time there?
No, it wasn't all of my time. I helped and I assisted this photographer. His name is Michael James O'Brien. If you guys anybody wants to look him up, a brilliant photographer, educated at Yale University, and also taught photography at Yale for many years. An incredibly inspiring person and an intellectual, and in many ways he was also the one that set up the different cabarets. He had different shows that he put up in New York. He had a poetry club in New York. An incredible person that became a huge source of inspiration for me in many ways. Not the outdoors though. So I got introduced to one of his friends who was the PR director for an Italian company, coffee company, Ili Cafe, and and that led to a job opportunity for an art show that they were sponsoring in New York called the Armory Show. And at the time, the Armory Show was the largest contemporary art show in the United States, and it was the one that produced the highest sales. So quite prestigious, and top contemporary artists were deeply engaged in all of his galleries, etc. So I did a job there for them and worked with them on the Armory Show for I think it was about 3 months, all in all, with pre-production and then the show itself and some of the post-production after. And that led into to basically opening a production company focusing primarily on epicurean and art related events in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah. So the
That's
first 6 years
incredible.
was that.
What a story.
Yeah, yeah. So but that's why I said how long time do we actually have? Because
As long as you want. I'm fascinated. I'm completely gripped by this because it's so far removed from the Danny that I know. I knew that you were involved in the fashion photography, and you did. I didn't know it was quite that long that you lived in the States, but I see you in camo and walking and fishing and cooking meat outside, and so this part of your world, which is a massive part of your life, I just didn't really know anything about. And I wonder, in those kind of, and this is maybe unfair to what my perception of the kind of people who move in that world, because it's not a world that I really know. But did you find that when you were talking about your interest and passions outside the photography and the world that you were moving in there, when you talked about fishing, or the desire to fish or hunt, that it was an uncomfortable discussion, or did you just avoid having them? How did that interaction go?
I never avoided having those conversations, and I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that many hunters they actually do, and it's certainly something that I'm seeing consistently. I never necessarily brought it up on the forefront. It was not something like you go into a studio and say,
Hey guys.
Hey, I'm the photographer, and I
uh,
hunt, and every single day I go outside
yeah.
and I like to
Do
cook
you
wild
kill your
game.
food?
Yeah, so it kind of the conversations will open up organically
Yeah.
over during lunch or something like that, where you typically get to know the people that you're working with if you don't already know them, and that was absolutely, there's never been a conversation that I avoided. On the contrary, I kind of always pushed it forwards when I felt it was right, and I think that's another thing that many of us can get better at, just understanding the situation and the people that you're around, and when the conversations should be brought up, or when we can actually engage. The worst thing that I see right now is so many hunters and have been scared away by the anti-hunters, and they're so afraid to have any conversations or engage with anybody that they don't know and actually talk about this. And I think there's a lot of hunters that are not necessarily equipped with the vocabulary or the thoughts, or have not kind of structured in their head for them to talk about what it really is, or what it means to them. Because we all know it's about going outside with a gun, and sometimes there's dead animals that ends up as a result of that. That's the picture that everybody have. But when you start talking intimately and emotionally about the experiences and what that means to you, and how your perspective on the world in general, how your perspective on life is, how your perspective on the food sources that we have, and how your perspective on your fellow humans have been formed and shaped by this connection that you have to nature and everything that's within it. Um, so for me, it was always a joyful kind of venture into the wilderness, if you will,
Yeah.
during these lunch times and during these conversations. So I never shied away from it, and um, I never had a bad or unpleasant experience where I felt that I wasn't heard, or the other person really greatly disliked me because I go out and I provide my own food, and I find peace and beauty in this lifestyle, this connection that I have.
Hmm.
On
But
the
you were definitely
go ahead, I'm sorry.
what you enjoyed was definitely not common in the company that you were keeping. Would that be fair?
Yeah, would be fair. Yeah, yeah. I mean, primarily the fashion industry. Many of the people in the fashion industry, probably the majority of the people in the fashion industry, are very passionate about it. The majority of them are creatives. They're deeply in love with what they do. It's a work of passion, and as much as hunting is a passion, when you're so engaged in a work of passion that's fashion, it will, for in most cases, draw you away from the natural world. Although now, obviously, there's enormous discussions about fashion and fashion's role in ecology, the environment, pollution, natural resources, etc. So, um, but that said, there was a lot of people that I know now, or that I've known throughout my career in fashion, that sought the same things. Going back to your question about being in New York City for that long, there's a tremendous energy in New York City, and the place that I anchored down and called home for the majority of the time in New York was in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, and before Williamsburg became a hipster central. It was primarily an old Italian neighborhood. It was the first and second generation Italian immigrants that lived in that area. So as soon as I got in there, I got this strong sense and feel of family and community, and something that I really longed for a lot. Something that I found, in a way, maybe a similar kind of feeling or emotional attachment to nature I found in that community there.
And did that come from the influence of the Italian culture in that area?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, well, there was several of the inhabitants in my little neighborhood within the 2 or 3 blocks that only spoke Italian. Every single day, when you open up the windows, you will hear them speak Italian outside, and that greatly influenced my and piqued my curiosity and my need and wanting to go and explore and spend more time in Italy. Um, yeah, but that really that neighborhood saved me in many ways, and I think that was the reason why I was able to stay in New York for that long time. But New York is not the forest. New York, well, let me back up. That's not right. New York City is not the forest. New York City is not the wilderness. But New York City is a lot of other things. You have parks around the city. You have coastline that has incredible fishing. I would go fishing on the south point of Manhattan down at Battery Park and fish for striped bass when they were pulling up into the Hudson River. You had the coast out on Rocky Beach. That was a half an hour drive or 35 minutes drive from my apartment in Brooklyn, and I would be out on the coast and standing in water, chest deep and fishing for bluefish or fishing for stripers or fishing for sharks. So it was kind of my wanting and need to get out of the city and have those or rediscover those natural connections and discover them in the vicinity of New York City that started pulling me further and further out of the city. And a 6 years into it, I bought a house in upstate New York, which is in Woodstock, like the Woodstock Festival.
The festival, yeah.
Yeah. Bethel is the place where the actual concert took place. It's named after Woodstock, where the primarily driving force behind the festival lived, and where the music center was, etc. So I bought a house up there, which sits in the middle of a state park. I believe it's 120,000 square miles of state park, the Catskill Mountains, and it's a wild place. It's full of rivers, big water reservoirs that feeds New York City with drinking water. Full of whitetails, full of black bears, grouse. On the outskirts.
And how far is this from the center of the city?
From the center of the city to the southern part of the Catskills is probably an hour and 45 minutes.
It's not really that far, and
it's not far at all.
It's like the perception. It's funny how we build these perceptions, and we build these perceptions through mainly what we see on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I had until a year ago, so I'd never been to LA before, and I had this perception of LA, which was just concrete jungle of a city.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong; it is a freaking huge city. I think in Greater LA there's something crazy like 13 million people. However, it's a really sprawling city, and in terms of like the high towering buildings, it's a tiny little core like in the center of it. And almost anywhere there you can see the mountains, and within an hour, depending on the traffic, you can be out and you're in the mountains where there's bighorn sheep and mountain lions, and you go a little bit further up the coast and you're getting into your national forests and out to the Joshua Tree National Park. And so you can, if you have a will to experience those places, even if you do live within those very big urban centers, they are there to access. And in the same way as like Edinburgh, one of our biggest cities in Scotland. I lived there for a couple of years when I worked in finance. Within 30 minutes of leaving Edinburgh, you're in as remote a countryside as you pretty much get. Okay, maybe West Coast would be, but Glasgow is an even better an example, actually, because Glasgow's West Coast, I think it's actually a bigger city. I think there's more people who live there. Within an hour of leaving Glasgow, you're up the West Coast Trail. I think within 2 hours you can be in Glencoe. The Glencoe and Ben Nevis, are the highest mountain, is there. So you can access these places if you have a will. I think that one of the problems with the way that modern society has structured itself is we've become a society of convenience, and so there becomes this sort of entrenched view that you never need to leave. Yeah, okay, you'll get on a plane and you'll go to a place on holiday, but in terms of experiencing the country that's beneath your feet and around you, we don't do that enough. And part of it is because our lives are so freaking busy. I think COVID-19 and actually forcing people to stay at home and see what is actually around you maybe will make people appreciate that a little more. Although, having said that, I don't know what it's been like where you are, but one of the things that's disappointed me most is in the early months of lockdown around the world, there was lots of articles about how people were going to appreciate nature more because they'd been forced to stay in their houses. And we were seeing these stories, some of which were true and some of them were actually fabrication of nature reclaiming the land that people are no longer in. The first thing that happened in the UK when lockdown got lifted, it got lifted in England first, is people flocked to these wild areas of nature, particularly the beaches. And when they left at the end of the first day of lockdown lifting, they left shit and litter all over those beaches. And I just thought to myself, for all of the crying about nature, and this is our chance to, almost start afresh because of this long protracted period where we've been in our houses. And then you see the actions of people, and actions speak louder than words. And they were all lying through their teeth. Every single one of those people who went and left shit behind, they don't care. And I think that unfortunately we see these things and then we project, and obviously this is not everybody, but it's still a shitload of people because there was a shitload of mess left. Mm-hmm. And it's too many people for all the people who are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to recycle, who are putting something back into the environment. You have another person like one of these people who left their litter on the beaches.
Yeah.
And it's really sad that we still live in a society that can't value, and especially after that long period where you think, I just want to get out, I want to be free. Mm-hmm. And they abused that. They abused what is actually a privilege, and we should have realized that it is a privilege to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. We've seen the same thing here. I think growing up in Denmark, I have a perception of what's right and wrong when it comes to the environment. I do think in many ways Denmark has been a role model for many other countries for some of the environmental initiatives that they have taken. And when you drive around in Denmark, the place is clean. I mean, you don't see litter. People just don't throw litter away. You don't throw it out the window. Of course, every now and then there's a fucking retard that does it, but it's not common. But the further south you go in Europe, the more common it becomes, and I don't understand why. But the the only reasonable explanation I have is it's a lack of education, and that coming from the institutions, both, of course, the official government institutions and the institutions that shapes us as our parents. You know, how is it that people are not brought up to understand that this is wrong? How is it that adults now in the case of my area, where so I have a river, a really beautiful river that runs through the valley where I live, and that river is very popular during the summertime. People come here to go swimming, and there's beautiful swimming holes all over. And during some of the most popular months in July, there were so many people that many of the small towns had to hire additional staff to come in and clean after these people that left everything that they brought, all the trash, old tents that collapsed, all kinds of shit there, and it blows my mind, and it aggravates me to see how people are disrespected and think that they don't take any responsibility for themselves or for the environment, the nature that they are part of. But I do seriously believe it goes back to education, and which is something that I quite frequently thought about when while living in the States, because you see it around, specifically around the metropolis cities. Inner cities are dirty in the States. There's very few that I visited where I've actually thought that if this was a nice place where trash didn't just fucking take up all the small corners of every single little street or alleyway. So so it's a sad development. I used to think now that during this period we had time to reflect, and when we have that longing to get out, we should um, take care of it in a different way. But
Yeah, you would hope so.
yeah.
So, just going back to New York, what eventually took you away from there and back to? Well, I don't know. Where did you go after that? I know that you're in Italy now, but I don't know if there was anything in between.
No, there was actually nothing in between this time. I went directly to Italy after living in New York for that long. I found my solitude. I found my silence. I found my connections up in the Catskills. Um, I had two different houses up there. I did a tremendous amount of hunting, and specifically bow hunting.
Oh wow!
And for whitetails and black
Were you
bear.
just doing that by yourself on public land?
Yeah, that was by myself on public land. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's it's something I still haven't had the I've had the opportunity but not the time to do
Hmm.
yet. Is go and hunt some of the public lands in the States, because even as a foreigner, as someone who's not actually from there or resident, you can do that if you buy an over the counter
Yeah, if you buy a license. Yeah,
license. So,
yeah.
and it's something I would love to do. I think probably the easiest thing for me to do is get one of the grouse licenses in Montana, which we talked about doing last year, but I never got around to doing. So, what an amazing experience to do that just off your own bat. Did you have anybody to kind of show you the ways and understand the species, which are very far? Well, I suppose deer have similar habits to European deer, but they have
Hmm.
a lot of species which we don't really have
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
that close
Yeah,
to.
I did. So the real estate agent that sold me my first house, I became very fond of, and she's a Leo, like everybody else in my close circle around. All my families are Leo. So even though I don't know how much I believe in astrology, it's there's certainly a pattern there that I cannot deny. So she became very much like a family member to me, and she was how old was she at the time? 50, in her early 50s, I think 52 or something like that. But shortly after I moved up there, she got a new boyfriend, and this new boyfriend was a hunter, and he had a piece of land, and I got introduced to him, and he was basically the one that took me under his wing and introduced me to hunting up there, introduced me to bow hunting, and since then I primarily bow hunt when I can. Unfortunately, maybe we can circle back to that. But here in Italy, it's pretty much impossible to bow hunt anywhere. It's not legal. So the majority of the time I spent bow hunting up in the Catskill Mountains, and it's a wild place. I mean, it's as I mentioned before, it's big. It's really big. So you can venture into the western part of the Catskills, and you will not see people for a couple of days if you take a backpack and walk into the forest. There's not a lot of people up there. That said, there is now, because a lot of people have since then started venturing up. A lot of creative people, as we talked about before, a lot of people within my industry are now seeking this kind of balance in their life, like I did when I first started looking out of the city and trying to find a place that I could go to and kind of be myself and enjoy some of the quiet time and emerge into nature and reap all the benefits of that time in nature. So.
When you moved over to Italy, did you just
Mhm.
maintain the similar kind of work that you were doing? At what point did you sort of dip your toe into writing in the outdoors, countryside pursuits type publications and taking that kind of imagery as well?
Mhm. So I had to. That actually happened before I bought the house up in the Catskills.
Oh,
I was thinking, I was contemplating how I could find a way to, not that I needed, but at least in a couple of different ways, justify getting out of the city and spending time there and not kind of just being caught up in that rat race mill in New York City, in the career mill in New York City. So I figured I would like to engage more people in the conversations around hunting, and specifically going into to the food sources that hunting, for example, can provide, or hunting and fishing and foraging can provide us. So it kind of sparked from what you asked about before, those conversations within the fashion industry, because it seemed like everybody that I spoke to was very intrigued. A lot of the people that I told my story to, and that I explained and took the time to explain what this means to me, why I live the way that I live. They were very intrigued, and many of them that had a negative kind of point of view on hunting before talking to me changed their perspective. So I was like, you know what? If I can within 5 minutes change the perspective of a non-hunter to, if not accept it, but at least respect my choice, what can I do, or how can I do that on a larger scale? How can I influence more people to kind of understand that and take advocacy for animal welfare, for example, for nature, for our environment? Um, so I contemplated that for a while, and then I thought, you know what, we have 95% of the world's population are carnivores. Um, if I speak about the one thing that we all do, which is eating, which is food, that's a common denominator for 100% of all people. 95% of them are carnivores. uh, you get, my experience was 5 minutes or less with anybody, even vegetarians. I would gain respect for my point of view. I would gain respect for how I lived. I would gain the respect for hunting viewed through my philosophy and through my eyes. So um, I figured, let me try and come up with a format. One where I show that nature is just outside your door, that everybody, even if you live in New York City, have access to it, that you can still immerse yourself into the wild and into these experiences and gain not only the experiences themselves, but a tremendous sense of well-being and a tremendous sense of connection to something greater than yourself and greater than the people around you or to the city or to your job. So I figured I'll try to start this project, and I I contemplated the name for a while, and I figured the Urban Huntsman was something that had a pretty good tone to it. I thought it was a. I ran it by some of my advertising friends, and they said okay for it. So I figured, what the fuck, let's give it a go. And so I did, and then I contacted a food magazine, which
Okay.
is called Copenhagen Food, which were at the time the kind of premier food magazine in Scandinavia. And I don't know how much you know about food in general, about the food industry, but at the time Denmark had the world's best restaurant, which was Noma.
Yeah,
Um,
I only know about that
yeah.
because my friend David CP pointed it out to me when I was in Denmark.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, so there was a lot of focus and a lot of eyes were on Scandinavia and Denmark specifically, towards a lot of eyes towards the food scene, and I figured that could be a good start, even though the magazine was in Danish. At least and it was distributed out to Scandinavia, so Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. At least those people will be able to read my stories, and I figured that will be a good way to start. So I reached out to the magazine and said, "This is my concept. This is my idea. I live in New York City. I'm a fashion photographer. Day to day immersed into this rat race and into these. I'm shooting beautiful models during the daytime, and then when the weekend comes around and when I have time for it, I replace the camera with a gun or a bow and I or a fishing rod, and I go out and have these reconnective experiences, these grounding experiences out in nature, and I cook my own food. And so I figured there had to be a format where I could make this interesting, where I could kind of be, in a way, a teacher showing by doing that this is possible. This is possible if you live in Copenhagen. You have the nature right outside the door. You can go harvesting different seaweeds, for example, right outside your door, where you're surrounded by water. If you're in New York City, you go to Battery Park and you fish for striped bass, or you go foraging in some of the parks that are right around. You can actually take a subway from Grand Central Station to the very end of the line, and you're in a state park. I mean, it takes you 25 minutes. 20, 25 fucking minutes on a subway with plenty of entertainment on the way there, and you're in a national in a state park where you can go out and you can go hunt there, you can go fishing, you can go hiking, you can go foraging. So I figured I got to figure out a way to. I got to find a way where I can inspire other people to take that step. And it also goes back to my own challenges and my own frustrations at the beginning when I tried to seek the outside of New York City. I found surprisingly few resources, surprisingly few forums or clubs that talked about this, that would go out or go hunting or go fishing or go hiking. There was no resources for this. There was nobody that talked about how to do it. So I was left on my own, and I basically, I started out with taking Google Maps and figured out, okay, where is the closest uh, uh, waterways north of New York City, and then I would take the car and drive out there and fish but I had to do it myself. So there was no sense of community there supported. There was nobody that would talk about doing group trips or nothing at all. There was no resources. So I figured maybe if I can do these stories here and I can try to distribute them through my own channels and for now collaborate with this food magazine. One, I would talk to non-hunters, which was essential for me because of course, it's great to produce content and tell stories to hunters. But for me, my objective with what I do that's outdoors related is to get out to as many people as possible and to as many non-hunters as possible to provide a different point of view, to provide a more in-depth and emotional point of view on the connections that we have with nature, and on try to have a nuance or create a nuanced image and understanding of what it means to hunt, for example. Because I think, my greatest wish is that somehow us, you, me, our wonderful colleagues at Modern Huntsman, that we can inspire enough non-hunters, and maybe there is a way. My dream is to create a sort of a 10 commandments for hunters, give them some tools, simple tools, for them to start a conversation with non-hunters, find that common ground. Going back to what we talked about before, I hate seeing the hunters that are grouping together in one corner, and then you have the environmentalists in the other corner, or whatever each group wants to call each other, because there's certainly a lot of different nicknames for it. But we all have this planet. We all are part of. We all have responsibility for the resources, and we all taking advantages of the resources that we have available to us in one way or the other. So let's find some common ground. Let's talk about it. Let's not shy away from conversation, and let's do whatever we can to engage. And if I can somehow help building bridges or breaking down some of those barriers with showing some of these stories, some of these experiences that I have, putting words to it, that now that you and I are having this conversation here, we're talking casually, but when I sit down and I write, the way that I formulate myself and the words that comes out are very different than a casual conversation. And you know that as well as I do.
Yeah.
You articulate yourself very differently. But what if we could help equip or dress both hunters and non-hunters to understand what it means to be a hunter, what it means to immerse yourself into nature and take part of it, as we do, take a part of the natural circle that happens in life and in nature.
Yeah.
So that was basically my objective with the project. The food magazine loved the idea, and we that was the kickstart of the project, the Urban Huntsman.
Wow. I think that, to what you're saying there, one of the fundamental starting points, if you are already somebody who is immersed within the hunting community, is a little bit of self-reflection first, because I think that without really trying to understand the fabric of meaning behind why we actually are motivated to do what we do, whether that be casting a line for brown trout or hunting roe deer, it's very difficult to articulate that to somebody who doesn't understand it, who has never partaken in it. And although there's a food element of it, there is more to it than just sourcing food for the table. It's incredibly important, and it should be a core value of it. But it has to be more than that. It has to be more than food, and it has to be more than just simply managing populations. We have lots of professionals in the country that I'm sitting at in Scotland who are managing deer populations year round for the benefit for the habitat, because too many deer can negatively impact the habitat. And that has very little to do with anything other than it's a job. It's a management tool, of which hunting by professionals is part of it. But really trying to get to grips with that sort of deep-seated nature of what hunting is to us as humans. is something that we don't think about enough, and you really need to stop and pause in your own space and time to really reflect on your actions and why you're doing it, to even begin to understand that for yourself. And that's why when I have the conversations with hunters and they're getting frustrated because there is this feeling that we are unable to, generally speaking, portray positively hunting and outdoors pursuits to the masses.
Yep, absolutely.
But I totally understand why people don't get it, because it's incredibly complicated, and most of us don't even truly understand it ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with all your assessments there. My time in the States, it's certainly formed and shaped me, but I also I try to reflect a lot on the people around. So the gentleman, my good friend Warren, that took me under his wing and showed me how to hunt in upstate New York. A retired state trooper, one of the warmest, most loving people that you could ever imagine, but it's never shown by communication. It's never words. It's by action itself, and specifically in the States, but also in general. Um, the majority of the hunters are males. We are not being taught as little kids that it's okay to talk about our feelings, that we are not being taught that we can have these kind of heart-to-heart conversations with the people around us. We should, the society teaches us that we should be these strong men that no matter what is thrown at us, we can manage it. And we should not be crying. That's definitely a big no. Hell not. Showing any kind of
Definitely
weakness
not.
or
Fuck
emotion like
no.
that. Yeah, fuck no,
If
not
you're a
crying.
man, you can't cry.
Yeah, exactly.
You're really. I mean, you've hit on something which is, for a man, for a male, incredibly important, because you're absolutely right. That is what society and particularly the culture that I grew up in, and it sounds like the same from you, and the culture that you experience for the most part in the States. There is that, and it is a burying. There is an encouragement for a burying of emotions, which I think does a disservice for us to be able to communicate other things in life later on.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but I'm very happy, and I'm very excited that more girls and women are joining our so-called brotherhood of hunters. Maybe we need to find a different word for that, but it brings a different sensibility to the subject. I do believe that if I as a male, and probably most people will say a kind of alpha male, can talk to most people around me in very different layers of society, and have generate an understanding, and in most cases an acceptance of the way that I live and why I hunt in less than 5 minutes. I think any woman can do it in half that time, or just by her sheer presence, because they bring different values as we recognize them in society today. So I'm really excited to see that, for example, that Modern Huntsman gave an issue to the women. It's tremendously encouraging that we are now seeing a lot of these strong women taking a huge responsibility on their shoulders and help to nuance or gain a nuanced perspective on hunting and what that means and who it is that's hunting, because. Maybe that goes back to a sexist kind of view on who hunters are, but just the sheer fact that it's a woman that's hunting instead, it just changes this perspective on the majority of people that are spectators to this, and it has tremendous
it
value
seems
for us
much
as a group.
less. It seems much less confrontational.
Much less, much
Yeah.
less.
Because we, as guys, I think that there is a tendency to, especially when trying to defend or reason the arguments around hunting or fishing,
Hmm.
to be more aggressive in nature,
Yeah,
and
well,
that's a
absolutely.
historic thing.
Absolutely. I mean, well, we're the ones who got sent off to war traditionally. You know, we just that image itself. You don't have to be history not to understand that it was the men that killed. You know, it's the men that goes out and says the dispute with the neighbor 100 years ago, and put a pistol to his head or a sword or bayonet through the heart. You know, it's us that did that. So violence in that sense, which many people are associating hunting with violence, is it's been seen as being ingrained into our DNA as males, and that argument, that barrier, that hindrance for a constructive and emotional conversation about what it is and who it is that's hunters, who we are, is being eliminated just by the sheer fact that there's a woman. So I'm hopeful that a lot of women around the globe will take out that responsibility as well as the rest of the hunters, us males, we need to do. I hope with the generation shifts that are coming within the hunting industry within the next 5 to 10 years, I hope that the younger generations, my generations, and the younger, even the millennials now that are, we're seeing a big group of millennials now actually seeking these kind of experiences, where hunting being one of them. I hope that these people, these fellow hunters and outdoor enthusiasts, will help us get a more emotional and nuanced perspective on hunting. I really hope so,
Mm.
because we need it dramatically.
It,
Otherwise, I don't think we're going to have hunting in maybe not so far future in many different
yeah, no,
areas.
that's very true, and I wonder, and I find myself asking this question internally a lot, is that if it was no longer, if for whatever reason through the rules and regulations that different countries enforced, it wasn't physically possible to take a bow or take a gun and harvest your own meat from the land. And maybe it could only be done for management purposes, but from a recreational standpoint, whether that's just society's view of it, where they just cannot stand this moral conundrum of somebody wanting to be able to do that for
Mhm.
themselves and for their own enjoyment, when you and I and most people, especially in the Western world who hunt, can exchange that time that they would be hunting or fishing for going to the shop to go and get it. We don't need to do it. There's
Mhm.
something much deeper than that.
Mhm.
And I wonder what truly would be lost if we weren't doing it anymore, if no one was doing it anymore. What would what would be fundamentally missing in our societies and cultures if that had been removed and we relied solely on agriculture
Mhm.
instead? It's a very big
Well,
question that.
yeah, it's a big question, but I think it's a very valid question, and something that I am contemplating frequently. I'll circle back to why. We see it in different ways. We see it now when people are gravitating towards the cities, when urbanization is sprawling, and everybody is losing connection to the natural world. Um, we don't have advocacy for it anymore. We don't when this discussion is it's almost so trivial, and that it hurts to continue to talk about it. But if we go into a supermarket and grab a piece of protein out of the desk, and we have absolutely no emotional connection to it, none, then we're not an advocate for it anymore. We really don't care. We don't give a shit. We don't give a shit if this chicken was pumped up with hormones and it's 8 weeks old and it should die when it was double that age. When his legs were both broken, this its fellow chicken next to it legs were broken because they pumped up with hormones and they grow so fast that the bones can't hold their weight. Uh, we are not advocates for it when polluters go in and deplete our natural resources, and we dig for oil and we frack to get the gas out, and we leave all the chemicals in the soil and it leaks into the rivers. We don't care about it anymore. So that is what I think is going to be lost. There's something that's going to be lost as in us as humans, and it's that connection and understanding that we are part and we're responsible for something that's so much bigger than we are. Um, One of the things that I do here occasionally is that I go out, and because I live in a rural area, I don't have light pollution, or very, very little light pollution. And at night, I stand there. Occasionally, I look up into the sky and I see the Milky Way and the stars. And you start to reflect and understand that you are part of something that's so much bigger than yourself, and that understanding of being a part of something in natural world will disappear. And I think that will be the end of nature and the outdoors as we know it.
Yeah.
So
If
it's
we don't,
very
if we don't have a reason, if we don't have
yeah.
a reason anymore
If we
to
don't have a
immerse
reason
ourselves
or
in
an
it.
understanding, if we don't
Yeah,
feel
and
it,
I think
it's
I think that's what you said there, though, is really important, because I think very often there is maybe a misperception that people who advocate for hunting or fishing want everybody to do it. And that is absolutely not the case, because I think, well, for a start, not everybody can do it, because there's not enough land for everyone to do it. There's not enough resources for everyone to do it. But I think an appreciation of the understanding, and an understanding that brings exactly what you said, the respect for life on a level which you cannot, I truly believe you cannot have as deep a respect for life if you are not prepared to take it yourself. And I know that there are plenty of people out there who have never knowingly killed anything that they would themselves, that they would then go and put on their plate, and they might be massive advocates for wildlife and animal welfare, and be signing all the petitions for battery farmed chickens and better welfare for cows. And that's great. We need more of that. But the profound respect that you get when you know that you are the person that is responsible for ending that life by choice is something that will never be matched just with knowledge alone. And I think the best thing that we can hope is that, just as you've been doing and are continue to try and do, is provide information and education for people to try and understand that part of the world better, that part of the world where humans still interact with nature, because so many of us don't anymore. And it's those people who interact with nature who can help those people who don't necessarily have the opportunity to understand that better. And sometimes that involves hunting. Sometimes that involves gathering. Sometimes that involves fishing. And I think
sometimes that involves going out and catching one of your chickens that are really cute and chopping off their head and
it does, yeah, exactly.
Half your arm up his ass and then pulling out the guts and then
when you're 5 years old,
yeah,
absolutely. And this use of wild resources is something that we should hold up in incredibly high esteem, and something that we should all be striving for. Now, I am not so naive to suggest that we can supply wild resources in terms of meat and protein to the masses of the 7.5 or 8 billion people that are on the planet and increasing, rapidly every day. I understand that is not possible, but an appreciation of the fact that we can still access wild resources, and we should still access wild resources because it is the one aspect of the cultures that exist in many different cultures around the world that truly can be sustainable. And that is very much missing. I think it's a puzzle piece that is missing in the conversation, where we should be proud to be able to say that we are contributing to our country, my country here in Scotland. We should be proud as hunters that we are contributing however many hundreds of thousands of tons of wild meat into butchers and into shops every year. And we don't need to replace that protein with agriculture.
Right.
That's a massive positive in my mind.
No, it's of course, absolutely. I mean, we can have an environmental assessment of what that actually means. How many tons of CO2 gases does that actually save? I know we are probably guilty that some of it is equaled out or balanced out with the amount of gear that we like to go out and purchase.
Yeah.
But there's an animal welfare, there's an environmental point in this. Everybody, going back one generation to my parents' generation, everybody all around Denmark, I'm sure, knew a farmer. There was somebody in the family that was a farmer. They had connections or touch point with nature on a different level that we do today. And when we don't have that anymore, I have this discussion so many times about buying organic. But it's a scheme, it's a scam, and half of it is not organic anyway, and the perspective is just not there. I'm really hoping with this generation, these younger generations, that we are going to see a dramatic shift, where we're going to start seeking these connections again, where we're going to start taking more responsibilities, and the data is showing that we are going in that direction, but that's only parts of the world. The biggest challenge is the areas of the world where the population is exploding and expanding the most. And they're just thinking about the day-to-day life and putting food on their table and survival and depleting the resources. We don't have to. I think we all seen pictures and footage of India, for example, in certain areas of India where the trash is just floating in the streets.
I've been there and experienced it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're going back to talking about the trash issue before, but there's so many bigger challenges that will all benefit. We would all benefit as hunters, as fellow humans on this planet, from a deeper connection with nature and getting in there, whether or not you are a hunter or a fisherman, or you're just taking a hike, or somehow paying tribute and reconnecting and putting your feet on the soil or in the grass.
Yeah. Danny, I am conscious of the fact that I have kept you on this podcast for already an hour and a half. I think we're just going to have to do another one at some point. But as a way to kind of bring it to a close, and it's something we mentioned offline a couple of days ago when we were hooking this podcast up, I think it's probably quite a nice way to bring this to a close with everything that we've just talked about particularly in the last 20 minutes, is that I think one of the great threats and dangers to the continuation of people's ability to hunt, and particularly if we're worried about what the perception of hunting is this horrible, I hate this coming out of my mouth, this idea of trophy hunting, because we just hear this trophy hunting phrase, trophy hunting all the time, and we see it in the papers. And I bring it up particularly with you because you wrote a story for Modern Huntsman a couple of volumes ago that was based in Switzerland, and it was to do with hunting ibex. And we saw a week or 2 weeks ago that one particular area, a region in Switzerland, has banned trophy hunting by foreign hunters, but my understanding from the reading that I've done on it is it's very specific. The local community there do not want foreign people coming in and exchanging what was actually quite large sums of money to be able to go and hunt an animal essentially for the trophy, for the horns, these magnificent animals which are ibex. But they haven't actually changed anything really fundamentally, apart from what seems like something that's going to damage them economically, because the same amount of hunting and the same amount of or proportion of male ibex are probably going to be hunted every year anyway as part of their management principles there. It's just that they will only be able to be hunted by the local people. What do you make of that story, and what do you make of the trophy hunting debate, and what damage that does to hunting as a human experience?
I don't know where to start on this. Well, let's start with just talking about the situation in Switzerland and in that canton, which the areas are called, the regions are called. It is the last region in Switzerland that actually, up until the end of this year, allowed for foreign hunters to come in and hunt the male ibex in that region. And there was a certain amount of tax that was allocated out to foreign hunters. I think there's two arguments to that story, and one of them is, of course, that fundamentally, I don't see anything wrong with people coming in, hunters coming in from different places and experiencing a hunt in a foreign country, and in this case in Switzerland, and going hunting for the ibex. If the money is allocated back into preservation and wildlife management, etc., that's okay with me fundamentally. But at the same time, I have to say the hunting is not being forbidden there. The ibex, as you mentioned, the same amount of ibex will be tagged out every single year. So the same amount of ibex will be hunted every year, but it will be by the local hunters. And that, I must say that I kind of support, because one of the challenges that we have in hunting today is that um, the majority of hunters today are aiming at, dreaming at going on big game hunts, which ibex would be a good example of. So when you have all these hunters, or some hunters coming into the world that has no or very little appreciation of the easier access hunt, going out with your dog and your son for pheasant for 2 hours in the afternoon, that damages us as hunters, as a collective group. And there's no doubt, if the interest is not sparked for that kind of hunting, we will see a sharper decline in hunters, because there's absolutely a big group of hunters that will never being able to fulfill their aspirations of going on a wild game hunt. There's a lot of hunters that will not be able to do that. So if we take away the desire to, and the want and the understanding and the drive to go out and have these day-to-day hunts and getting that experience, which is equally valuable to us as hunters, I think it's challenging for us as a group. And when you take away a certain amount of animals, such as ibex, from a local region and saying, well, these amount of ibex, you cannot hunt them here. So when local hunters understand that they have a very slim chance of actually getting a chance to draw a tag and hunt one of these ibexes that lives in their own backyard, and somebody else is coming in and paying $20,000 to shoot, 20,000 euros to shoot an ibex that essentially belongs to the people, belongs to the locals. I think the support for hunting will decrease. I think the public support of hunting will decrease. I think the hunter support of hunting will decrease. I think when there's not that when you can't aspire to go out in your own mountains around you and actually have a chance at hunting this amazing animal, this incredible, majestic animal. I think it takes away from hunting, and I think that will be have a negative impact on hunting in general. Um,
Yeah, it's a fascinating perspective, that, and it reminds me to remove myself from purely the numbers, because it's very easy to be continually drawn into the hard black and white of the economics or the
yeah,
science behind
yeah, but
something.
many times
But the
that
social
hard black and white is
importance,
not black and white anyway.
no, it's
A
not.
lot of it goes to administration, and what the fuck is administration? Well, it just disappears into a black hole. If we have in certain countries that I have, I'm familiar with. There's a 100% transparency. Like in Denmark, for example, we know exactly what every single euros that's coming in hunting fees, in license fees. We know exactly what every single euro is going to, and it's going directly back into preservation of wildlife, preservation and building of habitat, education, etc. But the majority of other countries that I know of don't have that transparency. There is nothing that indicates where that money is going to. So that the financial argument is not always that easy to rely on, and I think it's important that we remember that the people around you should be encouraged and inspired to become hunters or go out and hunt themselves.
Yeah, this goes to something that I've mentioned so many times on the podcast, and normally in reference actually to hunting in Africa, is that if you don't create a system where the local people and communities who are living within that landscape and sharing their day and their night and the landscape with the wildlife that exists with them, if they don't have a reason to be okay with that, if they don't have a reason to protect those ecosystems and those species, then
They won't.
they won't.
No. Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And
Yeah.
you can
And then
be
it collapses.
and then it collapses, and you can
Yeah.
be the best person in the world. The reality of the planet is that the things that exist around us because we want them to be there. And so, yeah, it's a really fascinating perspective. That I suppose the only thing that I would add to it would be that I hope that they can still have a system where it costs money to manage those systems. I know that they do it incredibly well there. It's amazingly professional. Is that there's still enough money coming in from other sources for that management and level of care, and the science behind it can still be funded.
Yeah, of course. I mean, but that's specifically a debate that's very common, and specifically in the United States. You probably have read about that or heard about that from many different people and outlets. It's a constant conversation that's being had. Who's gonna take over the amount of money that's coming in and being generated by hunting if you forbid hunting in a certain geographical area. Who is going to come in and actually fund the management? Are you willing to pay 2% extra in taxes, or what other environmental groups are going to come in and take over that financial responsibility to keep the wild places and the wildlife managed?
Yeah, it's
And
an
and
important
if
question.
and if there's no value, then other people will see value in that land, depletion of natural resources, or basically simply expanding cities and building on it.
Yeah.
Then our land disappears. Then it doesn't have the value.
Danny, with that insight delivered to my podcast listeners, I think we should draw this to a close, and we should just do this again sometime soon. I hope that as travel gets better, we can do this with a beer in my hand and a beer in your hand, and
that
we can
will be wonderful.
gradually become more pissed as the show goes on, because it'll probably get better that way. I've done that with Tyler before, and
I will certainly look forward to that. I had quite some good times with some Scottish friends of mine, and I know how entertaining you guys become when you start getting a little bit on the tipsy side. So,
do you like whiskey?
Nope, I don't.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, because I don't, but I always get given whiskey, so I have loads of whiskey. So if you'd like whiskey, I have a cabinet full of it.
Okay. No, I always kind of consider myself a bit of a pussy, for lack of better words, because I don't drink whiskey. I don't drink whiskey, and I don't smoke a pipe. I think that's two major flaws in my personality that I need to figure out what to do.
I think maybe that's two things that come with age.
I don't know. As I'm getting a little bit older now, there's other things that comes with age too. But I think that's again an off-air conversation. So.
Danny, thank you so much for coming on today. I genuinely cannot wait for our next conversation.
Thank you very much, Byron, and talk to you soon. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you once again for listening. Join me again in a week's time when we take another walk into the wilderness.